Welcome to Enter the Boardroom, the podcast for boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Mural, and home of the Enter the Boardroom community, the destination for serving and aspiring board directors. Today's guest is Scavazza, a non-executive director at London North West University Healthcare NHS Trust, a vice chair of Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust, and deputy chair of the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West NHS Integrated Care Board, where she also served as acting chair through a critical period of system change. Alongside her healthcare leadership, Sim chairs the Cold Group for Ethnic Minority NEDs and chairs the Office of the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education, and is a trustee of SmartWorks and the National Saturday Club. Previously, she had a 30-year executive career in fashion retail, including as managing director of Miss Selfridge. Sim, welcome to Enter the Boardroom.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
As an integrated care board member, you have been through or going through one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen board members tasked with, which is to sort of reduce costs by 50% in a very short period of time. Can you just take us through that journey and what's been hardest for you personally as a board member and acting chair?
The hardest is knowing the impact on people, because obviously with that sort of reduction, the biggest cost to any organisation is its people. And so that's swathes of people being taken out of the organisations and somehow moved on or, found different positions or made redundant or whatever it is. So basically we knew that there was going to be huge structural change. I think the most difficult thing for all of the board and for the executive was we were waiting for guidance on what we were allowed to do, what schemes we were allowed to launch, when we were allowed to launch them. So there was a lot of waiting. So whilst internally we tried to work out the best thing to do, we had to wait for NHS England and the powers that be centrally to just say, yes, you can now launch your redundancy scheme, or yes, you can launch your redundancy scheme, but there's no financing for it. So you have to find savings in order to cover it. So that's been really difficult for the HR departments. So they've had to work with that sort of in the dark sometimes and at the last minute, and then have to apologise to the staff to say, we're really sorry, we've just had this is now the situation. It's been awful. You wouldn't put anyone through that like that. That is not good. So the board has had to hold the HR departments, our people, the CEOs, to say that to give support in really difficult circumstances. And one of the things we've had to learn to do is be very agile. So we've called extraordinary, remuneration committees. We've called extraordinary board meetings where quick decisions need to be made. So the NEDs gave themselves up to being reactive and understanding how quickly decisions had to be made. We were there. So a lot of online meetings, a lot of things that hadn't been planned in, and a lot of making sure not only our people were okay, but the executive implementing all the changes were okay and are okay. So there's still that going on.
What do you know now, having been through that process, that you would have been helpful to have known as a board member at the start of the process, that a board member listening who's faced with a similar sort of significant cost-cutting program might learn from?
It's frightening when you understand the reality of how those costs are going to be saved. Because at the end of the day, it all boils down to people. It's always, and someone's on the end, the receiving end of those changes. Somehow you've got to distance yourself from it as a board member. So you've got to have a foot in both camps. You've got to be you have to do this because the organisation and the people that you're serving, the population, require that this happens in order to deliver a better service. So that's how you're kind of understanding why that's the motivation for what's being done. But on the other hand, you've got to be in the weeds, being able to say, are you okay? Have we got the support that's necessary to cushion the blow where we can, or to create avenues of assistance where we can? So I found it was very useful to ask all those questions, even though in the papers it would say, you'd ask, well, when and how, and, is that enough? what are the reactions from the people as they go through the process. So you're trying to keep it live as a board member rather than just to read the report. So it's very important to get those questions. And that's when you can surface whether things are being done appropriately, fairly, because equity then becomes hyper important, hyper vital to assure yourself that there's equity every step of the way and that some aren't being disadvantaged by the changes. So that's always a great fear of mine. So my questions always sort of really dig in to those areas. And, you know, I have to hand it to the NHS. There's equity impact assessments constantly, but you want to bring those to life so that they're not just performative pieces of paper with ticks in. So you've got to ask the questions in order to assure yourself that that is actually happening.
Can you give me an example to bring what bringing to life means for someone who hasn't done that?
It's just the questioning. It's the making the executive explain to you in a very succinct and simple way what something complicated they've written on one of their pieces of paper with all of means, and the impact that will have on the recipient, and the deadlines and the timing around that, and the way and the manner in which those processes are being delivered. That's what bringing it to life means to me, what it feels like to be the recipient, and how the executive are managing themselves, their behaviours, their leadership behaviours, their communication skills, testing whether they seem, you know, appropriate and relevant to deliver the end result in the right way. That's what bringing it to life means to me. You have to just be able to narrate succinctly what's happened, as opposed to, and give flavour and texture, to those very sort of bullet point notes on the paper. It's those bits of signals, and that's where you pick up where you think, oh, that sounds hard, or that doesn't sound like how it's described on the piece of paper. That's where you pick up the differences, and that's where non-execs add value.
Can you give me an example of where an organisation you work with has changed course on the back of that type of line of questioning?
Well, it's subtle. You know, I mean, we've stopped papers, we've stopped things going forward. So the non-execs and the board, if they're not happy, have stopped things, and the exec will take it back and rework it. Yeah, that's really important, because if it's not ready to sign off or it's not good enough, then lots of too many in all of my boards, we sent it back and it will come again in a different shape or form, perhaps with some more consultation and some more additions or exclusions. So that's really important, because things have got to be right, got to be more right than wrong, have an eye to the future, and have got to be stress tested. And that's what non-execs are really good at doing. We stress test and poke and prod and consider and look at the sensitivities and also pick up the signals.
So just trying to capture in my mind what that looks like in practice. So might this be someone's brought a cost savings plan to you and they have said, look, we're going to be making these people redundant and this is what we're going to do for them and how we're going to go about that. And you've then dug into that and felt, actually, you know what, there's not enough consideration for the humans here. We need to find a better way of doing this, that you then send back.
Exactly.
And they then come with a sort of a different approach to achieve the same outcome. Is that the sort of thing we're talking about?
Yes, that's a good example. And that's what we've done, Bob say, so that the support package, rather than just the process, you're looking at the support package for those people that are going to be affected, and when that will come in, how much that costs, and whether we're at liberty to be able to do that, and what that feels like, and how often that will happen. And therefore, you know, what touch points or interventions will the individual receive before they go off into pathway 1, pathway 2, or pathway 3, you know, voluntary redundancy, mutually agreed redundancy, or some other scheme. So it's that detail that you want, and that understanding. Absolutely.
When I've been involved with making redundancies in the past, one of the mistakes I've made is trying too quickly to see the silver lining and to communicate the silver lining to people, rather than just allowing people to grieve the process and recognize this is bad, this is miserable. What mistakes have you seen your executives and the board make in these processes that others might learn from?
Exactly that. There is no way around this. It's as I said right at the beginning, it's if you're distant from it and you've seen a plan and it's watertight and it's very detailed and very considered, as a board member, you might believe that that's all there is and that's enough to get you to the next position. But what everybody always underestimates is the pain and how people receive information. So whilst the board might say, look, just paint a picture of the vision of the future, and that will keep everybody going as they march into their new futures, it's not good enough. Some people they're not going to require that. They're not going to believe that that's enough to make them feel better. So it's the underestimation of the impact on people. And the impact on people will then dictate how fast you move into the future or what interventions have to be put in place in order for you to step your people onto the same page that the board might be on. And stepping they must do. So a lot of OD, a lot of organizational development where you're working with sort of management layers to help them communicate the difficult messages, to help them understand that this is hard, without sugarcoating anything, and teaching them that the learning actually from all of these processes across many, many organizations is telling people the truth. Absolute clarity, no sugarcoating of anything that might happen. Absolute clarity about what their position is, what they need to do, and what therefore their options are. And then timing. So that's what we've learned, actually. That's what I've learned. If you're not clear, it worsens the situation. People aren't stupid. Our employees know what's going on. They need to understand and hear the truth.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. I think the other thing that one of my other lessons has been the importance of investing more in communicating repeatedly, that, if you haven't said something 10 times, you haven't said it, but really thinking how you're going to relay that information. You can't prepare enough, I think, as an executive team. And I think the board certainly have helped me when I've been in those situations.
Yeah, definitely. You have to over communicate, even to the point where you think, but I just told them that. We just had a session. We had an all staff briefing. Well, it's not enough. You need to take another group and repeat. So not building in enough time, if that's a lesson, in the comms, in the communications aspect of it, and repeating what you said.
You've already mentioned the merger experience that you went through with Bob, the Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West NHS Integrated Care Board. Curious again, we've talked about cost-cutting. Curious to hear what you now know about going through a merger as a board member that a smart executive who hasn't had that experience won't.
Yes, it's so interesting, because at the end of the day, if you're bringing two different organizations and two different cultures together, it's almost, what I've observed is a vying for whose culture is better than whose, and which culture is going to take over, and which executives are better from which culture. And there's a bit of competition. It's natural. You compare, you contrast, you say, well, we do this better than they do. So there's them and us to begin with. So it's really important that the board is grown up enough to remain neutral and think about the organization that they want to move to. Luckily for Bob, it was the coming together of two ICBs, but to turn into a completely new ICB. That's very helpful, because then you say, well, I'm sorry, that's a new culture. That's a different way of working. It may extract elements from the culture that was Frimley or the culture that was Bob, but actually we're going to create something new. And you already put in place the organizational development plan to be thinking about that going forward. So everybody knows they're not coming with their old hats on. They're coming with elements of the best of the past, but being able and open to create something new. So it's really to that vying of who's best or what bits are best or what culture is going to survive. You have to get over that quickly and get the boards to show and lead the way. This is how you respect where you've come from, but get excited about where you're going and what that new organization entity will look and feel like. You've got a chance of building something new, and that's where you start capturing, the exec's imagination as they sort of lament what they've left behind. They start thinking, oh, actually, this could be really good. So I think that's the process you have to go through, and then you get to something hopeful and something new, and then the rebuild begins.
Do you think visioning that shared new future is always the way to go? Or is there ever a situation, if you had like one great entity and one entity that was a sort of rotten apple, would there be a situation where you think it would be right to say, well, actually, look, this culture is taking over? Or do you think it's always critical from a sort of human psychology point of view that actually you always create a new thing so that everybody is feeding into that new thing and there is no stasis or sense of stasis?
Absolutely think the latter, just as you've described. I think it's really important. Otherwise, it's about legacy, isn't it? And legacy can be very dangerous because legacy can hold you back. Legacy can dictate what you can and can't do. Whereas if you build something new, the opportunity to act in a different way, lead differently, think about issues differently is far more liberating, I believe, and far more important to the new organization, which can start off nimbly, unencumbered, kind of thinking about its purpose and vision in a way that its mission in a way that it hasn't been able to do because of all of the sort of barriers in the way. So it's knocking down the barriers is really important for the new organization in order to deliver. I'd love to hear others that have done it in a different way, but that would suggest to me it would take longer to get to where you needed to get to. I think building newer, faster, better is going to get you where you need to be.
What are the mistakes that you have made on that merger journey as a board that others listening can learn from?
Really difficult to unpick because it's like the experience. It feels like a great river that's swelled over, and you're in this river and being carried forward, even though you want to stop on the bank and just go, hold on a minute, I just need to think about this. But you can't stop it. It is just inexorable and it drives you forward. So if I look back, even more time talking about the difficulties and the challenges before we did it, but there was never enough time. You had to launch into the consultation. You had the meeting, but you always felt as if there was more to be said. So not having the time, creating the time, more time, probably very important. Probably could have done better, even better in that regard, or even though I think we did quite well. There's always learnings. So the biggest thing for us would be the lessons learned coming out of this and capturing those and letting them really be absorbed before, we have to go into it again, or take it into the new organization and say, this is where we've come from. So recognizing that, you can't do the 100 meters immediately. You might need to do some training first.
So are you saying that one of the sort of the lessons learned is to create more time to absorb lessons learned and to embed them in the organization before trying to move on?
Yeah, not much better said than I did, Ollie, but yes, exactly that. It's important that people that have been through this before share their experience because it's wisdom, and it kind of, if we, if mistakes can be avoided, it's much better because there's just this inexorable tide. So it's really important people speak up and share their experience, tell what they know. Nothing's ever perfect, but everybody tries their best.
And creating more time. I guess everyone is always short of time. So,
yes,
in reality, in my experience, that's always hard to do. Is there anything systemically you can do as a board to ensure that you are creating enough time that you've learned from that experience?
Just, I think, be organized. Because if you want board members to be able to convene, they've all got really busy diaries. So just practical diary management becomes the most important. The governance team becomes this huge tool that enables the convening of disparate sort of people with lots of different interests. So therefore, that becomes sacrosanct. The way they communicate, how much time they give you to, notice period for meetings, setting the chair, setting it up at the beginning, saying, I am apologizing now in advance. And this is what our chair did, we're going to be asking things of you that we wouldn't normally ask, which is make yourself available if you can. It's that pre-positioning and then as much organization as possible. Those are the sort of process things that can be done. And once that appeal has gone out and the sorts of, decisions that have to be made and the impact on people, you will make yourself available. We all have choices at the end of the day. Yeah. We all have individual choice and control over our diaries. So yes, it's always busy, but what's important and what's vital at that moment in your NED portfolio and what needs more attention than some others. And you've got to, with a portfolio career, you've got to be able to manage that really well, I would suggest. And that's what I've learned. You've got to go to where the need is. It's your one opportunity to be involved and make sure things are done properly.
If you're listening to these conversations and thinking, I'd love some support as I build my own board journey, that's exactly what the Enter the Boardroom community is for. It's the destination for current and aspiring board members, offering practical guidance, trusted insight, and a high-caliber peer community to help you build a credible board portfolio and succeed in today's boardrooms. Listeners can get 10% off. Head to etb.newroll.com and use the code ENTER at checkout. That's etb.newroll.com. That's interesting. One of the things we've done that I guess goes a bit to that pre-positioning point with our sort of executive board is we have holds between our regular meetings for problem-solving meetings that are in everyone's diaries, blocked out, and then the week before, if there is nothing for them, they get cancelled.
Yes. And if I look at my diary at the moment, it's full of those little sort of 1 hour meetings that we've called governance light or, finance meeting light, extra finance meeting, all interspersed in between the main subcommittees in order to give non-exec directors a run in to the sign off rather than is this the position we haven't been fully informed. So that's really important. And that's going on in a lot of my places at the moment. There's lots of extra half an hours and hours penciled out.
But are those recurring slots that will then be cancelled if you don't need them, or they're booked ad hoc?
No, they will be cancelled. They will be stood down is the language. Absolutely. And people have that time back. So yes, exactly that. So it's much more dynamic than when I first started, because in a moving, challenging environment, you've got to be dynamic as a board, as dynamic as boards can be, as agile as boards can be.
You've touched earlier on the importance when wrestling with some of these huge decisions of the importance of sort of equity and inclusivity. You chair the Seagull group. I'm curious to hear what you've seen through that, of where NHS boards think they're doing the right thing on the race and inclusion front, but are actually reinforcing the problem, and what, in your experience, actually works.
Yes, I think one of the issues is people treating cultural competency, inclusion, equity as a task and finish kind of project, as if one intervention or one piece of activity will solve it all and everyone can tick it off and say, well, we've done that. We're an inclusive board. That's a problem. It's hard grind. It's a bit like turning around an organization. It's going to take you 5 years to turn around an NHS organization in terms of performance, at least, So it's a recognition that it's it's really grinding, and there's too much performative stuff happening at board levels, tick boxes. So one of the things that the NHS have managed to do with their boards is we have quite diverse boards, but the problem is every 3 years there's churn. These board tenures are for 3 years, so you have a really good diverse crop of non-execs, and then 3 years later you're back to square one. So one of the difficulties is not building a pipeline. That's a definite. And if you speak to all of the headhunters and everybody, pipeline is an issue. You've got to work harder than you usually work in order to get diverse long lists, diverse short lists. So NHS has done well at representation on boards, but then I would question the pipeline and keeping up that representation. The second thing I would question is, yes, so you've got diverse board members, but are you listening to them? Do they feel like they belong truly? Or is this, we're just a token, tick the diversity box, and actually no one's really listening? So I think there's an issue with the culture and cultural competence, and board members who are, not ethnically diverse or not neurodivergent or not, don't display any of the protected characteristics. Have they done the work to understand what it means for someone else to be like that, and how difficult it is sometimes to contribute? So a lot of board members think, oh, well, we've done the job. Here's my diverse board, but they haven't done the work individually. We all need to do work individually when it comes to race, when it comes to inclusion, when it comes to cultural competence. Those things just don't happen. If you're brought up in an all white area, and you've never known anyone that's different, well, how would you know what language to use, what it feels like for other people? If you're not neurotypical, how would you know unless you informed yourself? So more board members doing more work, as opposed to thinking, I'm not racist, or I'm not biased, or we all carry biases. And everybody should understand Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety. Everybody, regardless of whether you're a board member or not, it's really vital. You can't lead an organisation that perhaps, some of the trusts in London, 70% of our staff come from different places or have different colour skins. So, what does that feel like for them? And are you able to understand that and their implications and their experience at work? And are you going to do something about it if it's not good enough? How can you if you don't understand it?
So if there's one thing a chair or board member listening to this could take as an action on that front, what would you encourage them to do, practically speaking?
Inform themselves of what the issues are. Instead of thinking they understand anti-racism or thinking they understand inclusion, go on a cultural competency course. But, we're meant to be in an era of lifelong learning. Lifelong learning means learning about yourself and your biases as well. Until you understand those, you can't be culturally competent. So it's facing up to, who you are as a grown-up person. And that's quite difficult for experienced people, I would suggest. I remember training to be a Samaritan. And one of the questions that was asked was, if a telephone conversation came in, what particular subject would you not be able to have a conversation with the person on the end of the line? What is the one thing that you couldn't countenance? You had to come up with that. And the way that they manage that is then you hand that conversation over to a colleague, because we all have those things that we're not able to bring ourselves to talk about. And that's okay, but it's knowing yourself so that we can still help that person. But between us, we'll all have different biases and different fears. So I've always brought that with me. Is, of course, we're human. We are taught atavistically to be able to, choose our group and feel more comfortable with some people and not others. That's an atavistic thing. So we have to know that, learn it, and sort of unpick it to be able to work in diverse teams, which we all know perform better and deliver better.
Before we go into lightning round, I want to quickly talk about your portfolio career and how you've gone about building that, and because it's unusual in the exposure you have to the NHS. I remember in episode 114, the former chair of NHS England, Richard Meddings, described the NHS as a huge ecosystem with 230 trusts, 550 hospitals, and 42 integrated care boards, each with their own boards and responsibilities. And you've got roles on both one of those integrated care boards and two of those NHS trusts. Now, you didn't come from a clinical or a traditional NHS management background. So what inspired you to build a portfolio career anchored in NHS boards?
Well, I suppose it's important to remember I didn't anchor my portfolio career in the NHS. That came about latterly. I already was chair of a charity, so I was already involved in the third sector. And I was already a governor at one of the big London universities and deputy chair. I'd spent, 9 years on the maximum term as a governor on the University of the Arts London, and then 2 years as deputy chair. So I'd already decided to move away from executive, and, I was consulting as well. And it was happen chance that got me into the NHS. It wasn't a considered, I want to do this. I knew I was happy sitting on boards. And I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I always tell this to everyone, stay uppermost in the recruiters' heads. All of the headhunters, just remain relevant. And you will receive all sorts of phone calls. And it was a phone call from one of the headhunters that said, are you interested in a non-exec position at the NHS? And I laughed as an ex-retailer. I can do higher education. I can do creative industries, yes, third sector. But health, I know nothing about health. And they said, well, they don't want you to know anything about health. There's reams of clinicians and people like that. We want some diversity of thought. So when I heard that, I thought, actually what they mean is the token black woman on the board. And I sent them back to talk to the chair and say, if this is all I would be, I'm not interested. So I needed to put that challenge in to make sure there was absolute understanding about the conditions with which I'd come in. You'd be taking me on because of what I'd done before, what I know now, and what I could add, rather than just being a, filling in of a box. Anyway, off they went back to the chair. Chair came back with the assurances that I needed, and I entered the process. And it turned out they were looking for people with user experience. Retailers hold their customer dear. Everything starts from the customer and works back. As soon as you cross the threshold of a shop, it's what's the customer going to feel, smell, all of these things to make them spend more, to make them enjoy the experience, to stay loyal to the brand. So that was my DNA. So you can imagine me coming into an NHS where everything's siloed and nothing really works and there's no user experience and there's holes everywhere and, your patients fall down bits that aren't connected. It's been fascinating. So I'm about people, patients, our communities, and then our staff that deliver that experience. So my whole, and then, so when I entered the NHS and realized, my people skills, my ability to be able to see through things, my strategic mind, my leaving legacy behind, all helps because I bring a kind of a fresh, energetic, non-jaded approach to things. There's always a way. I remember an old boss of mine used to call it the art of the possible. Well, that's it. Even though I'm told, well, we can't do this because this doesn't work and we can't do that way because we've always done. I go, yep, very nice. Let's work on what would need to happen if. So I think, it was, and then I love the people and the NHS offers people aplenty.
Take me to that first NHS board interview. What surprised you about the process and what did you get wrong?
I was surprised. I thought it would be all dry and crusty and a bit old fashioned. Yeah, sort of someone like Imperial and actually it was the opposite. It was just really diverse. I had all sorts of managers and senior executives and a real family of Imperial workforce that interviewed me. And I find it really refreshing. All the sorts of questions. I was asked what sort of music I like. And it was just really shocking and surprising. I loved it. And I thought, I like this. And that was my entree. So I thought, yes, I can be part of this because I can see they want to do things differently, perhaps. So I felt that was very strong, very strong. And I can't remember if that was a stakeholder or the actual interview. I think it was the part of the actual interview process. So that was great. What did I get wrong? I don't know. I don't. You come away from every interview, don't you? And you wish you would have said this and you wish you said that. But the one thing I couldn't do was pretend I knew what I didn't know, if that makes sense. So it was quite interesting for me. I had to go in with talking about the user, talking about digital, and technology to help, and talking about sort of who I am and what I could bring. I didn't know anything else. So if they didn't like it, they wouldn't be taking me on. So I don't know that I made mistakes. I was just honest, brought myself to the interview.
Many people are not aware of what NHS board roles pay, and they're not as transparent as some roles. They don't pay as much as commercial roles, but they do pay, not insignificant amounts. And obviously it's complex in a system where there is so much pressure on costs now to sort of talk about. But curious if you can sort of just help those who are newer to this space understand how they should think about motivation and trade-offs when taking on NHS board roles.
Well, you certainly wouldn't be coming to an NHS board role for the money. That's, to be really frank, it pays pitifully in comparison to your expected time commitment, and these roles have become more onerous and more accountable. So it certainly you wouldn't come expecting for it to cover your costs. And of course, the problem with that then comes with what sort of people are going to be attracted. People that don't really need the money, which means that's a certain type of person that's had enough of a strong executive experience to have money behind them. And they don't, so already it starts getting a bit exclusionary, doesn't it? It starts getting a bit, well, who can we draw from then? Because people have got to make a living and got to pay mortgages. So I think that's very tricky. And
when you say pitifully, can you just give us listeners a sense of the range that a role might pay?
Between 13,000 and 24,000, depending on whether you take on extra little bits of work or that sort of thing. That's my understanding.
So if you build up a sort of portfolio of 3 or so of these roles, you could be taking anywhere between sort
60,
of 40 and 70, 80 plus.
Between 40s. But you couldn't build up a portfolio of 3 roles. It's too much. 2 is just about manageable with all the board meetings and, all of the supplementary subcommittee meetings. You could manage that, but then what you don't want is to become an NHS insider. And if you've got a portfolio career, that's what you want, isn't it? A spread across industries or sectors. So you've got to manage it well. So I think it's not well paid for what is required of one, I would suggest. And I know that the NHS are looking at that, because I don't think they've looked at pay for non-execs for years. 20 years or something. I don't know if you spoke to Richard about it, but it hasn't been looked at. As a chair, you can expect to earn more money, and then obviously your time commitment again goes up. So that is really a tough, but they're paid quite well, I would suggest.
Well, and can you just give us a sense of what a chair might expect?
Yeah, between 70 and 80,000 pounds if you're chairing a trust, and more if you've got multiple trusts or, you've got multiple ICBs. That's my understanding. So it would be around that range. Yes.
And in terms of time commitment that goes with that, I often hear people joking when NHS board roles advertise for 5 days a year, they will, whatever they number to 10, 20 days a year, they talk when they refer to a day, it's a 24-hour day, whereas most people operate on a 8-hour day.
Yeah, you've got it. It's that. And look, if you're a committed Ned, you want to understand what you're doing. So you've got to set aside time, not just to read the 500 pages of board packs, but also to speak to the individuals. And all those conversations will take time, as well as your subcommittees, as well as if you're in charge of or a lead non-exec director on a particular issue like, well-being or freedom to speak up or maternity. We have these NED champion roles where you're expected to go a bit deeper, to be more connected to the executive and the division to make sure there's added assurance there. So I'm afraid they take longer. So any prospective non-exec director, trustee, governor needs to speak to existing trustees, governors, non-exec directors to find out exactly the time commitment, the real time commitment, as opposed to the to the advertised one. That's my biggest piece of advice for anybody new coming in, because the reality is different to what's printed. It's more.
Sim, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Yes.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
There's a book at the moment, and it's by Dan Wang. And what's it called? Yes, here we are. It's Breakneck. Yeah. China's Quest to Engineer the Future. Amazing comparison between America and China, legal minds in America, China engineers ruling the roost.
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
Posturing. Answering a question where the answer's already in the papers. People haven't read the papers.
Most valuable board ritual?
In the NHS, the patient or staff story, where we hear from individuals what it's actually like.
A question every board member should ask at least once a year.
How effective am I as a board member? Have I been? And how effective are we as a board?
What's a boardroom myth you think needs busting?
That it's frightening and can be full of certain types of people.
Favourite quote?
People won't remember what you said. People won't remember what you did. People will remember you by how you made them feel. I think it's Maya Angelou.
Most significant professional insight?
I'm afraid it's people making connections, being present, engaging. That's got me far. It's got me my jobs. It's got me my roles. It's got me on people's lists. It's connections.
A piece of board advice that sounds right, but is wrong?
Asking questions for the sake of it.
What's the advice that people have advised you to ask the question?
Ask a question, but I'm saying don't if it's not relevant. You just don't do it if it's not considered and deep enough. If it's off the cuff, I would say.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think one of our past guests referred to, you have maybe 3 questions you can ask in every board. So, treat them like silver bullets that you only fire off with great caution.
Exactly. Gold. Exactly.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time?
That people like me can't sit on boards or shouldn't sit on boards or can't contribute. They can.
And when you say people like me, what does that mean?
Well, I'm a woman. I'm black. I haven't run a FTSE 100 company. Those sorts of thoughts that perhaps especially women might have that think preclude them from these spaces. Don't let it.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom? And what did you learn?
Tried to push to a consensus too quickly. Massive challenge back. Felt terrible, inadequate. Learnt to communicate better, prepare better, and realise what might come up as an issue.
How are you better today as a board member than when you started?
Much more confident.
And finally, 3 things our listeners should take away from this episode if they take nothing else.
Really important for you to consider joining a board if what I call you're not typical. So if you're a woman, if you come from a different ethnicity, if you have a protected characteristic, don't be scared. We need you. Please come forward. I think be curious. There are lots of board positions in lots of different industries, in lots of different sectors. Maybe start with a third sector where you can practice your contribution and learn about governance, because there is a bit of learning to do. And then thirdly, just step up to the plate. We need good people, wise people, people that have got a lot of experience that can turn that experience into practical inputs to really make a difference. It's a bit like Jane Goodall says, we all have to do something. And this is my way of doing something. So hoping lots of different sorts of people would consider becoming a board member.
Sim, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom and experience. If today's guest has got you reflecting on your own board journey, Enter the Boardroom Community is there to support you. Designed for emerging, developing and established board members, the community brings together expert guidance, structured programs, peer connection, and access to real board opportunities, all without noisy networking or false promises. It's informed by New Roles Board Insight, but focused on helping you become a stronger, more credible board member. Listeners can get 10% off. Head to etb.newroll.com and use the code ENTER at checkout. That's etb.newroll.com.